there are some people who live through an era, and then there are people who define it. Cornelius Vanderbilt? He didn't just participate in America's Gilded Age, he practically invented it. He built an empire of steamships and railroads that literally reshaped the nation. But this isn't just a story about getting rich. It's a cautionary tale, a really fascinating one, about how one of the greatest fortunes in history, a fortune that seemed like it would last forever, could just vanish.
So just how rich are we talking? To really wrap your head around the scale of Vanderbilt's wealth, think about this. At his peak, it's estimated that for every single $20 circulating in the entire United States, one of them belonged to him. 1 in 20. That's a level of financial dominance that's almost impossible for us to even comprehend today.
And that right there brings us to the real puzzle of this story. He built a fortune that would be worth hundreds of billions in today's money, an empire designed to last for centuries. So how on earth did it all disappear so fast? Well, to understand the fall, we've first got to understand the man who clawed his way to the top.
Yeah, Vanderbilt's story really begins with a fight. See, he wasn't born into some elite wealthy family. Nope, he kicked the door down. And his first major battle was against this incredibly powerful, government-backed monopoly that controlled the most important waterways in America. And this fight, it would define his entire career.
Okay, so picture this. It's the early 19th century. If you wanted to operate a steamboat in or out of New York City, you had to go through the Fulton-Livingston monopoly. They had this ironclad, state-sanctioned stranglehold on trade. They set the prices, they crushed any competition, they seemed absolutely untouchable.
But Vanderbilt didn't play by their rules. He launched his own ferry service, and his strategy was just pure commercial warfare. I mean, he didn't just lower his prices, he completely obliterated the idea of a price. He was running his boats for free, betting that he could outlast his rich, bloated rivals.
In this quote, this gets to the very heart of his whole philosophy. It wasn't just about being cheaper for him. It was about being fundamentally better, leaner, and more efficient. He truly believed he could run any business better than anyone else. And you know what? He was usually right.
So what happened? Well, the outcome was pretty much inevitable. The monopoly was bleeding money that couldn't sustain the losses, and they collapsed. The Supreme Court even stepped in and affirmed that only the federal government could regulate interstate commerce, which opened the floodgates for competition. And from the ashes of that victory, Vanderbilt walks away with his legendary nickname, the Commodore.
So, with New York's waterways conquered, Vanderbilt set his sights on a much, much bigger prize. During the California Gold Rush, getting from the East Coast to the West was this long, incredibly dangerous journey. The Commodore saw a shortcut, and it wasn't through Panama, it was through Nicaragua, a gamble that would make him even richer. What he built was a logistical masterpiece. It was this integrated three-step system. First, his steamships would haul prospectors down to Nicaragua. Then, a separate company he controlled would move them across the land and lakes. And finally, another fleet of his ships would be waiting on the Pacific side to take them the rest of the way to San Francisco. It was audacious, and it was wildly profitable.
But Vanderbilt's ambition wasn't about to stop at the water's edge. Oh no. After dominating the seas, he turned his full attention to America's brand new railroad network. He saw it was the future of the economy, and he wanted to own it. And this ambition would lead him into one of the most notorious, bare-knuckle financial brawls in Wall Street history.
And he moved with lightning speed. Starting in 1863, he took a railroad that everyone considered worthless, the Harlem, and turned it into a moneymaker. Then he just started snapping up its rivals one by one, rolling them all up into a single, powerful corporation that controlled all access to the nation's most important city.
And to solidify this new empire, he built a monument to its power, Grand Central Depot. It was the physical hub for his entire network and a symbol of his complete and total dominance over transportation into New York City. The terminal that stands there today is its direct successor, a lasting piece of his vision.
But there was one key railroad that stood in his way, the Erie. And what came next was an epic clash. On one side, you have the empire builder, Vanderbilt, who actually wanted to own and run the railroad. And on the other, you have this trio of cunning Wall Street financiers who saw the railroad not as a business, but as a toy for them to manipulate.
So the weapon his rivals used against him was pure financial sabotage. As Vanderbilt was out there buying up all the Erie stock he could find to gain control, they were in a back room, literally just printing more of it in secret. This shady practice, called watering down stock, flooded the market with fraudulent shares, which diluted Vanderbilt's ownership and made his takeover attempt astronomically expensive.
The whole affair was just soaked in corruption. Drew, Gould, and Fisk actually fled to New Jersey to avoid being arrested and then used their money to just buy off politicians. This quote here says it all. A New York state senator took a bribe from Vanderbilt, then took an even bigger one from Gould, kept both, and voted with Gould. They literally paid the government to make their fraud legal.
The cost of that defeat was immense. Vanderbilt lost over $7 million, a staggering sum back then, trying to conquer the Erie. It was one of the very few times in his entire career that he was truly beaten, proving that even the most powerful man in America could fall into a well-laid trap.
Now, despite that loss, Vanderbilt's empire was secure and his fortune was bigger than ever. But as he got closer to the end of his life, the question of his legacy and what would happen to all that vast wealth really came into focus.
When Vanderbilt died in 1877, this was his estimated net worth, $105 million. In an era when the entire country's GDP was just over $8 billion, this was an almost unimaginable amount of money. And he left the vast majority of it to just one son, William, in a desperate attempt to keep the empire he built intact. Now, for a man who controlled so much wealth, he gave almost none of it away. His one major exception was a massive $1 million gift, which came at the suggestion of his second wife to establish a new university. That institution, of course, became Vanderbilt University, and it was his hope for helping to reunite a country that had been torn apart by the Civil War.
And this is where this story takes its most dramatic turn. So the first generation, Cornelius, he builds the fortune. The second, his son William, actually doubles it, which is incredible. But the third generation, well, they were raised in unimaginable comfort, and they spent the money with a passion their grandfather had reserved only for business. By 1973, less than 100 years after the Commodore's death, the great Vanderbilt fortune was just gone.
There's this timeless proverb that perfectly captures the Vanderbilt family's story. The grit and the hunger that it took to build that empire simply didn't survive. The grandchildren inherited the money, sure, but they didn't inherit the mindset that created it. They became famous for spending wealth, not for creating it. What a cautionary tale.
And that brings us to today. The family name lives on, most famously through journalist Anderson Cooper. But he is a self-made man. He said publicly that he inherited less than $1.5 million of that family money. It's really a testament to just how completely the Vanderbilt empire dissolved.
And so we're left with this question. Was the Vanderbilt saga just a unique failure of one family, or does it reveal a fundamental truth about wealth and ambition? Is the very drive that's required to build something so massive nearly impossible to pass on? Does that make even the greatest financial empires little more than temporary monuments in the grand sweep of time? It's a question worth pondering, especially in our own modern Gilded